Welcome to episode 255 of Silver Lining for Learning, Impact and Outcomes of the California Community School Partnership Program. That is an initiative that is huge, and we'll hear something about that. An unprecedented investment of over $4 billion for the California Community School Partnership Program, CCSPP. And we're going to hear from people who are involved at the Learning Policy Institute with a new report that's just come out. I have right here, Community Schools Impact on School Outcomes. We have Walker Swain with us today, who's principal researcher at the Learning Policy Institute, who has a background at Vanderbilt, and I guess at Georgia as well. We have Anna Maier with us today from the Learning Policy Institute, who is a senior policy advisor and researcher, has a background at Berkeley, as a lead author of Community Schools as an Effective School Improvement Strategy, a review of evidence, and the report Technical Assistance for Community Schools Enabling Strong Implementation, which she'll describe. Melanie Leung-Gagne is with us, a researcher from the Learning Policy Institute, who has a master's degree from Stanford University, and Cassandra Rubinstein, PhD candidate in teacher education and learning sciences at North Carolina State University. And we'll start off with Walker. Walker, would you like to tell us a little bit more about the Learning Policy Institute, about this report that's come out, and then we'll turn it over to the others to reintroduce themselves.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. And I the Learning Policy Institute, which I'm relatively new to. I joined LPI just over a year ago now. But it's I think a relatively unique organization in terms of really working to try to Linda Darlingham founded the Learning Policy Institute. And she always talks about it as sort of trying to build a rope bridge between the world of kind of rigorous research and education and policy and the world of policy making and the kind of halls of, really particularly at some of the highest levels in Congress and in state legislatures, but then also really trying to bridge to practice and really connecting at local levels. And before working at LPI, I was a professor at the University of Georgia, doing research, really broadly sort of equity oriented, mostly quantitative research, kind of evaluating impacts of programs and policies that are designed to kind of reduce the barriers of poverty and racial discrimination on educational opportunity. And I like your silver linings title here. I always try to look into things that I think hold real promise, in addition to the kind of work that's kind of documenting disparities and challenges, but really looking for opportunities there. And the community school initiative you described in California is one that I thought was a really unique in terms of the scale of the investment of something that in prior work, including from work that Anna's did really important work documenting, that we had a lot of good evidence that there were things happening in schools and smaller communities and even in recently in a large initiative in New York City. But so it was really an exciting opportunity to be able to check that out, and particularly with this team of folks they have here. And I just can let maybe maybe Melanie introduce herself first as we uh, started this project out together.
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Melanie Leung-Gagne, a researcher at LPI, and I've been here for 6 years. And so this is one of the many larger research projects that I think is very unique to LPI's model, where, I think prior to California's large investment, there was a lot of groundwork. I think Anna can talk about this too, kind of like laying it out to the field, like what is community schools and why is it promising and why should the state be investing in it? And so similarly, in early childhood education, we did something similar around the expansion of universal transitional kindergarten. And so my work at LPI focuses on it's pretty broad. It's primarily quantitative, and I focus on the educator workforce, as well as school climate and school discipline. So discipline rates and suspensions, which is one of the reasons why I was drawn into the project. And so yeah, Walker, you were just saying you've been here for just over a year, and I'm like, that is such a short amount of time, and we've already, this report's been out for 2 months or a little over that, and so yeah, the pace is fast. So it was just like, oh, it's been a whirlwind. But yeah, happy to be here. I'll pass it to Anna.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Maier. I'm a senior policy advisor at the Learning Policy Institute. I have been at LPI since it started in 2015, which is hard to believe now that it's been 10 years. But it's been a really fascinating journey to be a part of. We really started off as quite a small organization in startup mode. And one thing I wanted to note is that from the beginning, that Linda has really wanted to emphasize the importance of communications. So we really view ourselves as like having three legs, and that is our research work, our policy work, and also like really investing in communications capacity. Because we've seen that without that capacity to translate research and communicate it effectively, that we aren't able to have the same impact. And so I think that's also part of what makes LPI so unique is really thinking about not only how we can conduct rigorous and timely research, but also how we can communicate it in a way that really lands and makes a difference. Um, in terms of my background, I started my career as a teacher in Oakland, which has a longstanding community schools initiative. I went through the public policy master's program at UC Berkeley, and I worked with West Contra Costa Unified on their community schools initiative, which is in Richmond, just north of Oakland. And when I got to LPI, I kind of shared with everybody that this was an issue that I really cared about and had the opportunity to work on the first research product that we put out on community schools, which was a review of the evidence base. And I'm happy to talk more about that later if it's of interest. But I think what was notable about that is that first of all that I had the privilege of working with Dr. Jeannie Oakes on that project, and she really has been a mentor to like all of the members of the community schools team at LPI. But we quickly discovered that there wasn't a solid definition, and it's hard to do a research review of something that you don't have clearly defined. And so part of what we did in that study was to take different program evaluations of places that were calling themselves community schools and kind of look across those studies and try to see what some of the common features were. And that resulted in a definition that has evolved over time and been picked up in different places. And I think it's important, to also to the evaluation opportunities to say, like, do we even have a solid definition? What do we think community schools are? So maybe I can leave that question on the table because I'd love for Cassie to have a chance to introduce herself.
Thank you all. And thank you for the introduction, Anna. My name is Cassie Rubinstein, and I'm a research and policy consultant at the Learning Policy Institute, and I'm also a doctoral candidate at North Carolina State University. So I'll keep it brief, but at the Learning Policy Institute, I really work on a range of projects related to school and system redesign, which includes strengthening systems like community schooling as a strategy for school transformation. And before starting my doctoral degree, I had years of experience working in California public schools. And what really called me to community schools was the deep connection to this previous work. And I really saw that connection play out. And I think Learning Policy Institute is really seminal in the field as it relates to, as Anna mentioned, defining what community schools are. And so they really put that that school transformation strategy on the map for me. And so it even inspired my own dissertation work, which focuses on community schools. But I will keep it brief and leave it there and pass it back to Kurt.
Thank you all. Is this a by chance team, or do you operate as a team on other reports as well, or do they get assembled on a case-by-case basis, or have you worked together previously?
There definitely is a things. The groupings do sort of form a little bit organically and on a case by case basis. Now this group, as well as a larger team of folks who are a much larger team of folks who are primarily qualitative researchers out doing case study work, all actually now all over the country, are kind of a part of a broader community schools team. And this is and this subset is been focused on the impact work and particularly in terms of thinking about impact in the kind of causal inference, measurable measurable gains compared to comparison group sort of way, because you could think about it as impact too, that you're observing on the ground and in connection with the people there.
So now that the report's done, have you disbanded as a group that the report's out?
Oh,
or
no.
Oh, okay.
No, yeah, we're even closer now. Now we're both a traveling band together, talking about it, but also in part, like Anna was talking about. It's always immediately people say, "Oh, wow, the first cohort, positive impacts in the first year that you can see it. What about in the second year? What about the next cohort?" And I think that's one of the pieces where what about outcomes that you haven't looked at yet? We're finding benefits on student test scores, reduced, suspension rates, increased,
let's
chronic
get into
absence,
that.
but there's more. Yeah.
Let's get into that, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues for questions. Let me ask a question though. And I also want to point out, I got my educational researcher yesterday in the mail, and one of the highlighted articles is college canceled. What happened to California's high school graduating class of 2020? It seems as though what happens in California, the entire country is interested in finding out about. So your report is not just applicable to California. So, you're going to have a huge impact around the country. So, Cassie and Anna, Melanie and Walker, from your perspective, what are the key takeaways from the report? What in terms of the outcomes that you measured? In a nutshell, and what are one or two surprises that you got during this research? Let me turn it over to Cassie first.
Sure. I think some of the key takeaways were the reductions in chronic absence and also suspension rates, and also the improvements in math and ELA achievement. So what makes this really unique is also the match strategy. So I think when we talk about these key takeaways, we're also talking about the reduction in chronic absence compared to their matched groups. And so I think some of the biggest surprises for me in particular were the speed of where we're seeing these impacts. So we only had, when we ran this report, kind of like a limited amount of data to pull from. So what we consider the first full implementation year. So I find it pretty surprising that we saw some of these outcomes just within this time frame, and also the magnitude of the impact for certain groups, particularly the effects for Black students. So the differential impacts for Black students were substantially larger than the average, which I can pass it over to Walker and Melanie to provide a little bit more details on that. But for me, I found that particularly surprising and also very, like heartwarming, for lack of better words. And I also think that's pretty in line with what the intention of CCSPP was like targeting educational equity and providing these specific opportunities for various groups. But I'll pass over to Walker and Melanie to provide some more details.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Cassie's point about the comparison group, I think Anna, others on the team, we had really compelling case study work where we were seeing in particular contexts across the state where schools were making really big gains, particularly in terms of getting kids back to school, reducing chronic absence rates. Um, by really big numbers. And we knew as a whole, the state was making progress recovering from pandemic era lows. And so part of what you're trying to see is, how much of this can we, attribute to this initiative, that is trying to support efforts. It'd probably be good, for any listeners who haven't really dug into the report or the background to get even just thinking about what Anna brought up earlier about like what is this community schools initiative, and because I think there's a piece of the reason why we were looking at a sort of broader set of outcomes, but more than just test scores. But it's really is kind of people have different ideas of thinking about it, but it is really supposed to be a kind of whole child initiative that is that where you would expect to see it facilitating kids getting to school, facilitating kind of real engagement. There are specific elements of the initiative that are kind of explicitly trying to move schools away from exclusionary discipline practices, while also kind of facilitating the sort of engagement that might improve student behavior as well. So I don't know if Anna or if you wanted to kind of give quick background there. I don't know if it leaves that the question about results a little bit.
So how about we go to Anna, then Melanie, and we'll go to Chris for a question after both of them. So Anna?
Sure. Would it be helpful to hear a little more about what the intervention is, or do you want to?
Oh, definitely. Our audience would like to know that.
Yeah,
it's a little abstract to talk about.
Yeah, we were talking a little before we hit record.
Yes,
so that's that's good.
Yeah. Well, when I had mentioned earlier that we, had an initial research review that we published on community schools, there were 4 pillars that our team identified that were common across some of the different program evaluations. And that was integrated student supports, so other, often called wraparound services. So things like physical health care, mental health care, transportation and food assistance, expanded learning time and opportunities, and then active family and community engagement and collaborative leadership and practices. So how are the decisions being made at the school sites? And so, that research, when it came out, that was actually like a real learning opportunity for me, because I was like we were off in our corner doing our research review, and all of a sudden it came out into the world, and we saw that this definition was being picked up by New York City, by Los Angeles public schools. And different states have adopted the 4 pillars as their definition for grant programs. And the federal full service community schools grant program also moved over to the 4 pillars. And I think that, some of that was just that when you're talking about a very complex, locally driven intervention, it's hard to define. And so, in the policy world, it was like, okay, this is a list of 4 things. We can wrap our heads around it. But of course, that also oversimplifies the reality of the work. And it wasn't meant to be a perfect definition. And since then, our team has actually worked with the Brookings Institution, the National Center for Community Schools, and the Coalition for Community Schools. We convened a national task force called Community Schools Forward, where we brought leaders together from all different parts of the country to have a very intentional discussion about the framework and what we thought, kind of an evolved definition should look like. And there's, like that's an amazing resource for anyone who wants to kind of go deep into what community schools are. But I think, one of the key changes we made was we took those 4 pillars from our original research review. We added some of what we've learned from the science of learning and development. So really looking at like neuroscience, what are the conditions that lead to thriving for youth? And we added to those 4 original pieces um, community connected classroom instruction. And when we were talking about expanded learning, people always have viewed that as like after school programming, summer school. And that is a huge piece of it. But we also said in order to really see academic impacts, we know that we need to be also thinking about the learning experiences students are having during the school day in the classrooms. Because sometimes when we see this work implemented, the wraparound services are incredibly important, but if it's viewed as totally separate from the life of the school day, then that's a very different approach to implementation that's not as comprehensive. And so, we really wanted to emphasize that piece. And so we see, oftentimes that students are doing project-based learning, that community schools are emphasizing, sort of hands-on learning opportunities. They may be sending students out into the neighborhood to, to conduct interviews, to learn about the history of their neighborhood, to test soil samples. Like there's all kinds of ways to kind of engage with the community as part of the learning experience. And the other piece that we added through that task force work was having a culture of belonging, safety, and care. And I think that's something that's always been part of this work, but just kind of really intentionally naming that school climate is a huge piece of this. And that if like the start really is establishing trusting relationships, redefining the way that as I mentioned earlier, decisions are made, and really making sure that students, that families, that community partners have a voice in the school. There often is a position funded through these grant programs, which is essentially a community school coordinator, although that position can have many different names. But just saying that it's the job of someone on campus to kind of be that connective tissue, to be the hub, to be thinking about the ways that the after school program, the school day, community partners are all coming together to support students and families as a whole. And
Well,
so, that's kind of what we like. We have the 4 pillars in the California grant legislation, but the state also produced an expanded framework that was approved by the State Board of Education that really gets to some of those other pieces. And so I think that's been important for implementation.
well, as someone who just finished a course on learning environment design and teach a course on motivation, the school climate is definitely very important. And there must be
Mhm.
days where each of you just sit there and pinch yourself. Am I really working on such an important project, meeting people from the Brookings Institute? My gosh, I mean,
Yeah.
what a great life, eh? Melanie, you want to add anything to what we've heard? And then Chris will ask a question.
Yeah, I think another unique part about the CCSPP is it targets the highest need schools. So it is a competitive grant, but they prioritize schools with over 80% what we call unduplicated student count. So these are students who are eligible for free and reduced price meals, foster youth, and English learners. So it's targeting the highest need schools. And across the cohorts, the students are 87% on average. The schools are 80%, so 87% students UPC. So it's actually exceeding the goal of the program. And so I think one significance of our findings, especially as Cassie mentioned, the findings around, Black students, English learners, social economically disadvantaged students, is this is a big opportunity to close those gaps. And I think one thing that is very interesting is that this program offers a lot of flexibility. So the school decides what it focuses on based on that framework that Anna mentioned. And so it can look very different. Like some focus on restorative practices, some are, developing a community farm, providing food, and some have like a wellness center at their school site. But I think, your question on what was interesting was to seeing, we measure very mainstream outcomes, like attendance and suspensions. It's data that's available statewide on the California Department of Education website, but these are very, I think the diversity of community schools and the communities, but we're seeing, very consistent outcomes. And I think that is something that is very worthy to note because I think often, and in some other research I do, teacher turnover, and there's like specific policies and programs to target that. But something about community schools is a very holistic approach where you're engaging the family and the community and you're addressing the very diverse needs. And I think, you see a holistic change, and Cassie mentioned redesign, and it can look so different, including ways that make learning a lot more engaging. It means bringing students to school, offering the buses or making sure they have food. And we can see when these very basic needs are met, and then coupled with, improved school climate, you see these very, just cascading positive effects. More students are coming to school. And we also find in our report an interaction between attendance and achievement. So when a school is able to improve achievement more, the effect on math outcome, especially, as well as some ELA outcomes, is even greater. So it just means like being in school is more impactful for these students. So I think that's something just very unique about the California program.
Wonderful. We've heard a lot about the program. I'm going to turn it over to Chris and then Lydia after Chris.
So I want to build on the discussion and also to make a couple observations. As I look at the 4 pillars, just based on my general experience with school districts throughout the country, all 4 are obviously evidence-based, all 4 are powerful. The one that I see the least of is actually true family and community involvement. And I think that's in part because it's the hardest to do, the most time intensive, the most resource intensive. It takes time, as you know, to build the kind of trust that's needed in order to accomplish this real, alliance between families and communities and schools. But part of what we do on Silver Lining for Learning is we look not only at a brand like the California Community Schools as a brand, but we also look at it as a model. So maybe I'm in a state that isn't as wise as California in terms of supporting this. And I want to get started, but I don't think I can do all 4 pillars at once. I'm wondering if your research is disentangling some of how the pillars interact with one another, which ones might produce the biggest synergies if they're done together, or any other advice that you'd give to people who want the full model, but who have to start with parts of it because they have limited resources.
I think I love that question, and it comes up a lot, I think, I'd love to hear Anna speak to it too. But I think there's the first question, when we're talking about the particular work that we've just done, I think part of what we're seeing, because in California, you had all these other investments happening too at the same time. There was sort of coming out of the pandemic, of a real substantial amount of new federal support. The state as a whole was really trying to invest a significant amount in kind of equity-oriented initiatives, getting these literacy coaches out, and big investments in expanded learning opportunities, like sort of what they'll talk about as universal after school or summer school program. And part of what the community school framework and the way that these grants played out, I think, is partly just trying to empower someone like Anna was talking about as a community school coordinator. It's kind of in the approach to how you utilize the assets and resources that you have to meet the needs of your community. And I think that there's an element of the I was just out visiting a set of schools talking about the report a few weeks ago, and part of what you would see a lot of is the changes a little bit the dynamic of the family engagement. If the families are empowered in decision making, if they feel like the barriers to learning are breaking down, and so they're always a little hesitant to try to think about like, oh, do you break this apart? Because I think there's an element of it that is just oriented around trying to increase the sort of democratic processes, so the families are not the just like the recipients of schooling and trying to be in compliance with the school's needs, but are really partners in the process, and that the school is trying to that the school is operating as a vehicle to empower them in supporting their own and their neighbors' kids, and also so then you kind of say, oh, well, we do family engagement without without providing the kind of wellness center or making sure people have transportation. I don't know, like they go hand in hand. And if you're not talking to families about assessing their needs and the assets of the community, and engaging with them in a way that that is really seeing them as a partner in the process, and also leveling up teachers in that kind of power dynamic. I think part of what we're finding is, you have some of these comparison schools that we're looking at. They do have the extended learning opportunities. They are having some of the initiatives that are oriented towards more connected learning opportunities. There are these other initiatives in place, but what they're not necessarily having is kind of running everything through this filter of the assets and needs of the community, and having an individual coordinator, sort of team that is also kind of accountable to this set of ideas, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, one of the things that we do with our community schools work in California is that we work with a group called the California Partnership for the Future of Learning, which is a statewide network of community organizing groups. So there are groups that organize students, that organize parents, faith-based organizing. We've been supporting a shared learning agenda, so doing site visits and online learning opportunities with schools throughout the state to kind of try to learn about best practices from this grant program. And one thing they always say is nothing about us without us. And I think that is really, really important because, oftentimes people think about integrated student supports as like the thing that's different about community schools. And that is so important when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, if you can't see, or you're hungry, or you're not feeling, just cared for, you're not in a space to learn. And we know that's true for adults. It's true for how we function as humans. Um, and at the same time, if you have a school leader who's making all the decisions about what the needs are within the community, that's not collaborative, and that's not going to build the trusting relationships. So, and I think, Walker, you nailed it, talking about assets and needs, because that's often, I think, the way that you start this work from a grassroots perspective. If you don't have a grant program, is going through an assets and needs assessment as a school community and saying, like, let's take stock. Like, what do we think what are the strengths that we want to build on in our community, and like, what are the challenges we're experiencing that we really want to tackle together? And it should not just be one person in a position of power who's making those decisions. So it really is kind of a different way of trying to do business.
And I'll just add quickly, I think, community schools is in some ways a very efficient model in that you're leveraging resources that the community already has. And so all of us were recently at Oakland High. We were doing a site visit at this community school. And the principal says they have over 20 programs that offer, extended learning, various services for their students, but only a handful are funded by the school. And so the others are already, those partners already have their funding. And so the role of the community school coordinator is to bring this in or see that the school has this need. And then, okay, let's bring you guys in to offer this for our students. And so I think very key is engaging like the local community so they know which resources they can leverage, and then also targeting the root causes of various challenges that the school is facing so that it's very like it's a program that actually does help and meet the needs of students and their families.
It is complicated. Sometimes I see parents who have sort of a laundry model of schools. I'm going to drop off the cleaning in the morning. I'll pick it up in the afternoon when it's been processed. And that's what the school does, right? They don't see themselves as necessarily having a lot of responsibility if the school is doing its job. And so trying to get families beyond that, and I would say especially perhaps more privileged families beyond that is one of the challenges. Lydia, let me turn it over to you.
I love the laundry model of school. I've never heard of it, but it's so accurate. Thank you, Chris. I want to kind of like move us a little bit from, understanding community school in a more like a conceptual theoretical level to a more like concrete level. Maybe this question, like Cassie, can go first. Can you give us like an insider view of a community school, what the school is like, what the programs that are being offered, how teaching happens, how students learn, and how do you empower teachers to to do like project-based learning and different pedagogies in your school?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Lydia. And I think, as this team has pointed out, the great, positive of community schools is the flexibility to meet the needs of the community. So I'd hate to say that all community schools look the same because the flexibility is part of the model. But I will say, we're learning a lot from community school case studies through LPI. LPI is doing a lot of work. In particular, one cross case study that we are publishing is a look at the West Kern Consortium, which is a rural district, a rural group of districts, LA Unified, which is a large urban district, and also Linwood Unified, which is a mid-sized suburban district. So you see there's a wide range of geography and size of districts. And what we're seeing across these districts is that they're using funds to support things such as robust professional learning opportunities, utilizing it to create strategic partnerships, having continuous improvement structures, and importantly, dedicated administrative capacity. So these are just some of the shared things that we're finding from cross-case analyses, but I would like to focus in particularly on LAUSD because I think what LAUSD really connects to some of what we saw in this particular report, which is the gains in terms of ELA and math. So in LAUSD, there's a specific emphasis on teaching and learning at community school sites. So to paint the picture, their community schools initiative is couched under the division of instruction. So what this allows is for this kind of initiative-wide professional development, looking at community-connected learning, such as project-based learning, integrating community schools with their existing linked learning pathways. We also see kind of the creation of a project-based learning champion at the community school sites, which is a teacher leadership opportunity. And we're also seeing a focus on restorative practices and SEL. So how do we create a restorative classroom culture? How do we contribute to this positive school climate, which is like essential to the success of community schools? So these are just some examples of what we're seeing in our case study work through LPI. And so whereas the study that Walker, Anna, and Melanie and I are all on kind of focuses on what is going on? What are the outcomes we're seeing? This case study research comes alongside that say, how are we seeing this? Like what is going on in these schools? So to answer your question, Lydia, this case study work really supports this report that we're talking about and showing us the how. But I think Anna could expand on this a little bit more, especially because she has a lot of great background, especially on districts such as West Curtin Consortium, which are doing some really, really impressive things.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I think we all just visited a community school, but one thing that I found consistently with all the schools I visited over the years is like you can just feel the positive climate when you walk in the door. Like, and I think that is maybe the hallmark of like just a good school in general is like you walk in and like the adults are welcoming. It's a very open space. I often notice, especially in high school, students will greet me when I walk in the front door. They'll be like, "Hi," which is, not always the case when you walk into a school. And oftentimes there's parent centered, like right up front, where you can see if I were a parent, I could immediately go here and like have a space where I feel welcomed. Um, I so I think some of it is just the feel. Um, and I don't know if Melanie Walker, you want to share more about like the recent site visit we did, but it's like
Yeah.
every community school is unique, but I think there is that shared feeling of like this is a place where people feel welcome and want to be.
And I guess to throw just it's just so different how it plays out. And it's really like the community school coordinator seeing the need. So in our recent site visit, they have a wellness center at the school. And so it provides both physical and mental health services. So and it's available to students as well as teachers. So they're like, oh, I need to get my vaccination, but I don't have time during, you know, the workday or like time off, to get that vaccination. So it's very simple things like that. Um, and also the community school coordinator would organize activities like lunchtime art activities at the wellness center so that students can go there, and they intentionally create it as a very safe space. And so, students it's a venue for students to make friends, especially, in a high school, in a cohort model. And making friends is a very important thing for drawing, a kid to come back to school. So that's one example. There's others examples where in Anaheim, there's a school that they did a community farm. And so all the students participate in, maintaining that farm. And it's also like selling those produce to the community at a price so you're actually contributing to the food security of the community. But in the process, kids are collaborating. They're learning about, biology, they're learning about math, they're learning about many skills. And it's also like a project that is not just relationship building, but very supportive for learning as well. Um, And I think it really goes back to the context of the school as well. So like I'll raise another example in Oakland International where they've been running on a community school models for many years, but you know, there was one year where, you know, they suddenly had a big jump in unaccompanied students in the early 2000s. And so what their community school coordinator did is she actually went down to the border to understand, hey, what are these students facing? And ended up writing a book called The Faraway Brothers, which is a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, about some twin brothers from El Salvador crossing the border and then ending up in their school. And so it's like a deep understanding of the context of their students and then supporting their learning and thriving. So just a few examples of how very different it can look.
But do you have a follow-up?
No, just really appreciate the diversity of examples and the flexibility of the program. If there is time, I have a follow-up, but I don't have to.
I have small questions, minor questions. So why don't you jump in first?
Sure. Like this holistic approach, it's like a community-based approach really resonate with me and make a lot of sense. I think probably for like our audience as well. I'm just wondering, like, you know, the issue around budget and cost is always a good excuse not to change anything. How would you convince someone if you say like, oh, community school, how much does it cost versus if I don't, engage in such model, how can you kind of think about this both in terms of cost in the short term as well as the long term? Because if we don't invest in education today, the long-term cost is
Mhm.
enormous. So how can we like think about that and for like the skeptics on the fence, and what would you say to them?
Well, I'll let Anna speak to some of the things that uh, people are doing across the country in terms of um, costing some of these scale initiatives. But I think there's one part of it that is really about organizing your resources in a more efficient way. I think, it's if you I was thinking about in the sites that we're visiting that you could imagine a scenario where where your central office is spending money to try to meet the needs of the students or put programs in place that are after school initiatives or expose them to different cultural opportunities, but that are not actually aligned with the interests or needs or assets of the community. And so then you can wind up, um, in what the community schools framework and model, does for you is to sort of require you to, at every step along the way, engage with, well, what do we have? What do we need? What do our students, our families care about? So that you have, um, where you are connecting, local pediatricians and dentists with students who need their supports. You're connecting families to, uh, families to activities that are facilitating their engagement. I was thinking about the after school programming, where you can imagine. I've worked in different after school programs over time where there are things that the kids are not actually into, or that attendance there is poor, or same is true throughout the day. And so I think there's that piece of the efficiency, and then there's also the element that is what you sort of hinted out about the longer term, on the benefit side of this. We're talking about this. We're not really framing this as like a math intervention, but the impacts that we're seeing on math learning outcomes, on this standardized assessments are really substantial, and particularly among groups that have where a lot of initiatives have kind of had a hard time moving the needle on that. And there are all kinds of um, there are just general human moral reasons why you might want that, but there's also all kinds of economic research about the kind of benefits to your society and the long-term returns to those kinds of outcomes. So I think Anna could talk a little bit about how people are budgeting and costing the kinds of policy level interventions, that people are doing in states like Maryland and New York and California, federal level, that are actually at a per pupil basis really low cost. I think that's one front. We always throw out there the $4 billion, but part of the reason why it's so substantial and part of the reason why I think this work is important is that that's now touching 2,500 schools. We're not, that's it's not like we gave one school a $4 billion renovation. It's on a per student basis, this is a really something where we're seeing significant benefits, but at a really modest cost.
So we'll have Anna, and then I'll ask a question that I'll let anyone answer, and we'll wrap up this session.
Yeah.
So Anna.
Great. There has been some cost benefit research in this area. A lot of it is more directly focused on integrated student supports, the wraparound services. There has been some attempts at looking at cost benefit associated with the children's aid community schools in New York City, and also looking at the cost, like the amount of resources leveraged by a community school coordinator in Albuquerque, New Mexico. But what we see in general is just that there's a very high return on investment. So it's usually between $5 and $15 for every dollar invested. And that range is somewhat dependent on the methodology. But I think like the basic point, as Walker was saying, is that like this is an efficient investment, and we know that you get more out of it than you spend on it. But also that it's complex. And Chris, I think that's what you were pointing to earlier. Like it takes time. This is structural change. Like it's not, we're very pleased to see that there are results kind of coming out within the first 1 to 2 years, but we also have a robust technical assistance infrastructure in California and a number of initiatives that have been doing this work for many years before the state started funding it. And so I think that, and also our case study team is actually working on some additional cost benefit analysis, because I do think it's really important to think about that longer term picture. And in terms of the actual amount of money involved, if we look kind of across the country at different states that are funding community schools, it's usually around $150,000 to $250,000 per school site per year. Like that's the most common amount we see in grant programs. And some of that is dependent on school size, cost of living in different states. But like it's substantial, but I think we also see that there are substantial returns as well.
Well, a lot of people be wondering about that dollar amount you just quoted. I'll ask two 15-second questions, then I'll ask a question we'll go around to everyone. Just, are you guys on a road show now, going around the state promoting this report, or around the country? What's
I'd say
happening?
we're on a road show in California.
For sure.
Everyone wants to hear
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
So
and also in conversations at the federal level, and then we have folks who are embedded in work that is really around the country in places like Tennessee, North Carolina, et cetera.
etc. That's great. So the second question, quick one, is, are there jobs? Can we post at the blog post with Silver Lining for Learning a jobs link so that folks who are listening to the show or watching the show 4 months from now might be able to go online and connect? Can you send me something that is jobs related? And how many people work at the Learning Policy Institute in total?
Anna, do you know what the number is now? We've
think
grown
we're
a
around
lot in very recent
We're around
years.
70 people, 75, which is funny because The original vision is that we would never go above 50 because, the point was not to get too big, but, we have expanded a little beyond that. We do have an employment page, which we're happy to share, and, different positions come up at different times. We have, well, I feel like Cassie, you're the one who should wrap our intern program because that's how we found you. But we have a regular internship program out of both of our Palo Alto and we just moved out of our Palo Alto office, our West Coast office, our California office that is in transition, and DC. And then there's other, research positions and such that are posted there as well.
Sounds good. So I'll let Cassie talk about internships, but the other three of you, if you could talk about what challenges and barriers you had in this first go round, what other metrics, what other areas you would like to measure in maybe your semi-ideal world where you'd like to see an impact. And I know that's a broad question, and we only have a minute or a half minute for each of you because we do need to end, and we have to introduce the next show. So we'll start with Cassie. Tell us about the internship, and then we'll move to the others, talking about what's not been assessed and what they'd like to see assessed.
Sure. I think LPI has a really robust internship program where they really try to cultivate the skills of kind of early career scholars and early career people that are focused on education or policy. And so I was a part of that internship program, and I found it to be not only extremely enlightening, but also, as I mentioned at the beginning of the segment, also really put the idea of community schools on the map for me and really shaped my interest in it and has now become my a topic of my doctoral dissertation. So I will say that the program is extremely robust and it's pretty competitive. There's a lot of people that apply every year, but just similar to other internship programs, it is a paid internship. So they do put a lot of work in making sure the program is not only equitable, but also highlights what you bring to the team. And ever since I've been in the internship program, I really do have always felt a part of the LPI community. So yes, definitely suggest everyone looking into the internship program, especially if you are a doctoral student. I think it's really helped me hone in on some really key skills.
Thank you for that, Cassie. Melanie, what would you like to see assessed in the future?
Yeah, so I mentioned a big part of my work is around the teacher workforce, and this is something we're already starting to do is to look at the impact of community schools on teacher retention, especially teachers of color in these high need schools where we know are experiencing the most severe teacher shortages and churn, which is costly both in terms of for student learning and in monetary terms as well. So that's something, California actually has not had staffing data for 5 years. And so we just got that data earlier this year. So that will be one of the immediate next things that we're working on. And I'm really excited to see just how that goes, just because of the collaborative leadership pillar of of community schools and how it engages teachers, supports their leadership. I think it makes a lot of sense for teacher retention to be an impact of community schools. So I'm excited to see that.
Thank you, Anna.
Yes, I think that we really would like to look at school climate. That is challenging because we don't have a statewide survey in California. And, there's also just so many other broader measures of well-being that are not in state data sets. And so I think that's kind of the next frontier is trying to figure out how we can work with some, more localized initiatives to track other outcomes they care about.
And finally, Walker, we have a minute left or a half
Sure,
minute left.
sure. Yeah. Anna and Melanie took two of our favorites. And I would say one of the things that feels important in addition to trying to look at how these are sustained and how the initial impacts we see are sustained or building in later years. The other thing is that in the report we find really particularly substantial impacts in elementary schools, and less so in secondary schools, but the outcomes that we're looking at are not necessarily our ideal outcomes for secondary schools. I'm not really looking forward to trying to explore what we can find around, like we haven't yet looked at graduation rates or California has a sort of college and career readiness measure or kind of course accumulation, college enrollment, some of the things that you might capture things better than the standardized tests, which is much more ubiquitous and standard in the earlier grades.
Well, thanks to all of you for coming on here today. It's been an enlightening show. As I prepared for this show, I was thinking we need to bring them on not just once. We've got a follow-up sometime down the road. So please inform us of interesting projects that you're working on and reports that have come out, because we might want to revisit this report or take a look at new ones. Chris or Lydia, have any final things or comments?
Just to say that this work is wonderful and to thank you for the kind of sustained and sophisticated research that you're doing.
So we take a few weeks off, actually, for winter break here, and we reconvene on a Saturday, January 3rd, to have a host reflect on prior episodes. So this is the last show for 2025. We're in season 6. Season 6 will end in March, but yeah, we've been going for quite a while. And everyone have a great winter break and Happy New Year to all the listening audience out there from Silver Lining for Learning, from us to you.